When it comes to British sports car manufacturing, there's one name that cannot go unmentioned, and that's MG. One of MG's most renowned sporting numbers, a highly successful model on both sides of the Atlantic, was the MGA. This is an early model from 1956, and it's a fairly new investment. The collector previously owned another of MG's classic creations, an MG TD Midget, but swapped it a year ago for this much-loved all-time classic. Featuring a 1500cc engine, this superb example usually takes to the road at least once a week, and has undergone a slight refurbishment project to get it into tip-top shape. The sleek MGA series first appeared in 1955, however it was many years before this time that the company had made its initial impact on the motoring scene. Cecil Kimber, the founder of MG, developed a passion for motor vehicles at an early age, and was destined to make his own contribution to the industry. Racing motorbikes, becoming assistant to the chief engineer at Sheffield Simplex, then moving on to AC cars, Kimber went through a series of jobs before working for William Morris. During his time working at the Morris garages, Kimber produced the first MG model. Although there was very little to distinguish the Morris and MG cars apart at first, Kimber soon developed a sporting edge that would go on to grab global recognition. Like most of the great British marques of the classic car-making era, things didn't always go to plan for MG. War, financial worries, and business disagreements all played their part. Nevertheless, MG produced some excellent models, finding a particular niche in producing neat little two-seater sports cars. It was with the advent of the MGA that the company stepped into a new and very modern era of styling. Post-war MG cars had previously looked like restyled pre-war models, but with the masterful designs of Sidney Eniver, this was all about to change. Doing away with its previous square-shaped looks, a more curvaceous and lower-sitting body was created. Not only did these features enhance the car's sporty appearance, but the low centre of gravity also made it very nimble and easy to handle on corners. Even so, the old MG design methods of using a separate chassis and detachable front door side screens for open-top models were still maintained. In fact, the public had already been given an indication of what MG were planning 4 years before the MGA actually arrived, when George Phillips had driven a rebodied TD Midget in the 1951 Le Mans race. The appearance was so different to that of the original TD Midget, it was almost unbelievable to imagine that it was the same car underneath. MG proposed that a road-going version of this car would be a suitable replacement for the fading TD Midget, but BMC, MG's parent company at the time, chose to concentrate on building the Austin Healey 100 instead. The TF Midget went on to replace the TD, although it soon became apparent that this wasn't enough to impress the public, hence the MGA was released. The model's new and fresh style was very well received, and a coupe version, which became standard in 1956, was available throughout the MGA's production. The coupe carried off the good looks of the open top perfectly, even mimicking its soft top profile. The MGA's exquisite appearance was equally matched by its performance, taking its engine from the new BMC B series, with a cubic capacity of nearly 1500 cc's, a top speed of 98 miles per hour was achievable. However, this was soon improved upon with the advent of the MGA twin cam in 1958. With 108 brake horsepower and a 1.6-litre engine, the new MGA variant could reach 113 miles per hour. As the performance statistics suggest, the twin cam wasn't designed to be an everyday runaround and was essentially aimed for competition use. Other mechanical refinements included 4-wheel disc brakes, uprated suspension, and special centre-locking steel disc wheels. In theory, the twin cam should have been a bestseller. However, an expensive price tag, along with a reputation for unreliability, meant that the plan to make 2,500 of these models was not followed through. With the proposed production figure falling short by almost 400, MG decided to use the leftover car parts in an exclusive deluxe MGA Mark II model. Only one major factor distinguished the Mark II from the normal twin-cam model, and that was the engine. Today, the deluxe variant is highly sought after. Next to come in the MGA range was the 1600. Brakes were improved from the original model, with discs to the front wheels, whilst drums remained to the rear. New front lights were also fitted, and the windows now featured sliding perspex. During production of the 1600, MG was facing tough competition from its rivals, most significantly Triumph, who were also offering an attractive sports car package in their TR range. The MGA 1600 was, however, a cut above the rest, and one of the most successful members of the MGA range. Despite its outstanding reception, a Mark II variant was introduced in 1961. The Mark II, with a slightly larger engine capacity and a higher gearing, upped the maximum speed of the 1600 from 101 to a recorded 103 miles per hour. Other changes included new horizontal tail lamps and a redesign of the radiator grille, which now featured inset slats. Production of the 1600 Mark II lasted for just 1 year and was the last of the MGA range. It was a very hard act to follow, but MG had already prepared themselves, producing a superb car that yet again went beyond the boundaries. The replacement came in the form of the MGB, which went on to serve an illustrious production period for the next 20 years. The original MG mark was in continuous use, barring the period of the Second World War, for 56 years after its inception. A blurred and mildly complicated history and origins in its early years, there are disputes about how the mark was founded. In this programme, we shall get up close and personal for a change, with owners featuring alongside their prized vehicles and telling all. Welcome to the world of the MG owner.
I'm Peter Pym, the owner of this nice MG. During the 1936 to 39 period, the MG company came out with three models called the SVWs. This is in fact an SA Charlesworth Tourer Type 3. In those days, the police in Lancashire were very keen to get these cars for the purpose of stopping speeding motorists, and in fact were getting a discount from the MG company, as the Home Office were giving 10% of the cost, which in full was £385 to MG. So the Lancashire Police Force had a number of these cars. This particular car left the MG Abingdon factory on the 19th of November 1937 and was run to Charlesworth Bodies in Coventry as a running chassis. As I said, the list price was £385, and the scheme run by the Home Office at the time was the Home Office Experimental Motor Patrol Scheme, which was known as the Courtesy Cop Scheme. Finally, the car was sold in 1948 for £250. I, in fact, purchased the car from a Dutchman who had had the car since 1978 with a view to restoring it. He had in turn bought it from someone in Hampshire. So when 1969 came around, the Dutchman, who hadn't finished the job, decided enough was enough. So I was able to go across to Holland, negotiate a price with him and bring it back to this country. I got it back on the road after restoration in 1998, and I've been going to shows ever since. With regard to the registration number, it now has its original number, CTE 737, which indicates that it's a Lancashire number. I had to get that back from the DVLA. I had difficulty getting it back, but fortunately the Lancashire Police have kept their records since the 1930s and were able to assist me. In fact, I've made many Lancashire Police Force friends since purchasing the car. The car isn't original. Of course, as a police car it would have been black and the interior would have been blue, but I prefer a coloured car rather than a black car. So it was my choice of colour. At the time, of course, I didn't know it was a police car. It was only through researching the history of the car that I found out that it was in fact a police car. There were 90 Tourers, SA Tourers made. They came in three particular styles. This is Type 3 with the cut-out door, the spare wheel on the side, and of course no rear bumper, which was quite common in the 30s. The other types 1 and 2 had the spare wheel at the back, and the doors had a straight line running from bonnet to the rear. So this is a very distinctive car, of which it is believed there were 29. The ones that I know of are spread throughout the world, everywhere from New Zealand to Vancouver in Canada. SAs were originally known as the 2-litre MG. It was later in their production that the power of the engines were increased to 2322 cc. And here we have an example of a restored engine. points of interest are the jack-all system, which the car has for lifting either the front or the back or all four wheels. The oil is contained in a special container on the bulkhead, and on the top of the bulkhead you've got the 4 essential tools that one would need. Obviously there is a toolbox as well, but they're essential features. And there is also the nipples for oiling the appropriate parts of the car when needed, when it's being maintained. 2 fuel pumps, 2 SU carburetors, just about sums the car up, and of course it's painted in Brunswick green, which is the correct colour for the car. I would like to tell you how it is that I've purchased an MG. As a 4-year-old child back in the 1939 era, I was sitting on the bonnet of my father's SA Tickford drophead coupe, having a photograph taken of myself and my parents. So Tickfords, especially SAs, have always been something that I longed for. 10 years ago, the best I could manage was the baby version of the SA. That's the VA, which was 1.5 litre, and that was a drophead coupe, a Tickford bodied, as my father's car was. But having had that for 7 or 8 years, I felt I must have an SA, and the opportunity arose through an advert in the MG Car Club magazine, Safety Fast. Someone was selling the car in Holland, and of course the very weekend I found out about it, a trip was made to Holland by myself and my wife. She thought I was absolutely crazy, but needless to say, after quite a bit of haggling, I managed to secure the purchase of the car and brought it all back in back of a lorry in its boxes. The only parts of the car which were immediately reusable was the engine and the chassis.
Jerry Lawson, this is my car. It's a 1950 MG YT. T stands for Tourer. Previous to this they had an MG YA and a YB, which were the 4-door saloon versions of the car. They made 877 of these vehicles, mainly all for export. Only 4 were sold into the UK. I've only had this car 4 weeks and I bought it from Holland. The previous owner sadly died, not in the car I might add. And his widow wanted to go to somebody who would use it and enjoy it, so I went across on the boat and fetched it, and we've been using it and enjoying it for the past 4 weeks. It's a nice thing for us. Well, the car itself, as I say, is 1950. Very rare in this country. In fact, there are 17 known of in the UK, of which only 7 are actually on the road being driven almost daily, as it were. The technical aspects of the car is that it's the same engine and running gear and chassis as the previously produced MG TD and TF. The rear half of the body is basically a Morris 8E, which was modified by the MG car group at Abingdon, and it's one of the last traditionally shaped cars with an upright slatted grille, separate chrome headlamps, and the traditional sort of driving style. It shares its engine and gearbox also with a lot of other cars, Wolseley, Wiley. It's what we call an X-Pag engine, and it's 1250. It's not expensive to run. Most parts are available for it still. It returns 25, 28 to the gallon on the run, and we find it very comfortable. 70 miles an hour is not realistic, but 55, 60 miles an hour is quite comfortable with the car. It's enjoyable to drive. I've always had MG cars. I mean, I'm 42 at the moment, and my first car was bought when I was 17. I've got 3 other MGs at the moment. We just like MGs, the way they drive, the way they're built. There's a tremendous following for them, including a very active owners club and car club with a full race series. We intend to go across to Ireland with the MG club very shortly, in this I hope. And it's one of those things, we've grown up with it, we love them. It's very good. The previous owner of the car had owned the car 14 or 15 years, and 8 years ago he spent a small fortune on it, having it restored professionally to the tune of something like £15,000 or the equivalent in Dutch guilders. Every last nut and bolt was looked at and replaced. The engine, gearbox, everything was done. He even managed to find an original set of carpet covers, seats, etc. And put a lot of money into the car, time and effort. At the moment there's a few minor paint blemishes, but apart from that she's very good mechanically. There's no rust or rot in the bodywork, and I intend to do the paintwork eventually, as and when I get time and effort, get around to doing it. But I'll enjoy doing it, and it'll be my achievement. The dashboard of the car is reminiscent to very many pre-war cars, in that it has twin hump scuttles as the pre-war race cars would have. We have the tachometer in front of the passenger seat on the left hand side there. The main dashboard considers petrol gauge, temperature gauge, fuel gauge, and the main speedometer is in front of the driver obviously. On this car it's in kilometres because the car was supplied onto the continent. The starting button is on the right hand side of the centre dashboard and is of pull. It's a pull type effect. The previous owner has put a separate temperature gauge underneath the dashboard on this car, which is quite realistic. The car actually features an onboard optional extra in form of a heater. So the car actually has a heater to be used. Very mechanical, made out of plywood box with a fan in it and an element. And it works okay, but no great shakes. The car itself is manufactured in 1950. It is of course a much older design of vehicle, probably from pre-war days. The first Y types were built in 1946 and there were prototypes before that. This came along in 1950. It's 1950s type motoring. As such, we don't go on motorways. We try not to go on motorways and busy roads. We get bullied by cars, lorries, coaches, that sort of thing. We tend to stick to the local lanes, have a nice little run around. 50 miles an hour is more than we really want to do. It's just the joy of having something that's handmade, handcrafted in the UK, very rare. It's enjoyable to drive. Of course, there's no roof, although we have the roof in the back and the side screens to put on if it does ever rain. Living in South Wales, we get quite used to that, up and down and all that. It's just a very much enjoyable car to drive.
My name's John Heatlin. This is my car. It's a 1947 MGTC. It's an ex-Kent Constabulary car, patrol car. Kent Police bought it brand new back in 1947. They owned the car for 3 years. It then went to a BBC conductor, named was Frank Cantel. It's had 3 other owners since then. I'm the 5th owner of the car. I've had the car 7 years now. It's been fully restored by myself and my mates. Everything's been done, all the paintwork, engine, interior, underneath, all been done by ourselves. We've been to various events over the last couple of years, MG shows and non-MG shows. Yes, MG police vehicles, they're not that rare. They use quite a lot of MG police vehicles over the years. Dating back from pre-war, even back to the 1930s, the police used MGs. and they've been using them right up to 1979, I believe. They even used one of the later models of the MGB GT V8, also MGBs as well, which they use on motorways for catching people that were speeding. Well, I've always loved MGs. I've always owned MGs. I had an MGB, a modern one, an MGB GT V8 for 20 years. But I've always really wanted an older one, you know, like the TC. This is why I bought the TC. It's got a lot of character, the TC, I think it has anyway. And it's a pretty little car, and a lot of people like it. They seem to like it anyway.
It's a 1933 MG K3, supplied new as a rolling chassis to Whitney Strait. He then had Thompson & Taylor build the body that you see on the car now. It was used originally as a Grand Prix type car. It was then owned and raced by Dick Seaman, who obviously went on later to race Mercedes and others. The car belongs to Peter Green, and he's owned the car since 1979. It came back from America, where it spent quite a while of its life. It received then a ground-up complete restoration, and since then has been used in several events. It currently holds 10 national speed records for its class. It races every August in the Nürburgring in Germany. It's raced at the Monaco historic race 3 years ago. It's used for sprints, hill climbs, concourse. Not quite an everyday car, but it's used for an everyday event. It is a lovely car to drive. It's a lovely car to look at. Very, very attractive car. Sounds wonderful. Very lucky to drive it. Just a fantastic car.
Owned by my father, Peter Green. He bought it from Ireland in 1994. He then completely restored it back to its current condition today, in readiness for a reunion of all the trials cars. We use this car a lot. It's used for races, hill climbs, sprints, concours, gymkhanas, driving tests. I usually race this car and sprint it as it's sort of more my size. It's done very well. It's won Car of the Year for the MG Car Club. It's won the Speed Championship. It's used by all the family, really. It's a lovely little car. As a lady driver, I love driving these cars. I've always been brought up with old MGs. So from a very early age I've been going to events, and then soon started driving myself, and as I said, I've raced it. They're lovely cars to drive. They're not too fast, but they go, very reliable, quite difficult to drive sometimes. You know, if you're coming on the motorway today, the wind blows you and you have to really hold on to the steering wheel. But no, they're lovely cars to drive. I really, really enjoy driving them.
I'm Alan Wilkins, and this is my 1275 Midget, 1973. This one is. It's got the round wheel arches, the same as the Austin Healey Sprite, which they made for about 2 years, between 72 and 73. It's been refurbished to a reasonably high standard. A 1275 engine with all the aluminium bits and pieces on there. It took me about 9 to 12 months to refurbish. I got it in a state of the body shell, another cloned body, which we call, I bought a shell and a donor car, and the shell was refurbished, and the donor car, which was a 73 Midget, and all the bits from the donor car was then replaced onto this one, which made a reasonably good car. We've been to 2 shows now, twice this one, and one at Abingdon Works show. This car has got an oil and a temperature gauge, which is combined. A rev counter, which gives you the revs per minute of the car. A speedometer, which this one reads at 99,000, so it's getting on for some good mileage. It's all black interior with a leather back seats, which are original. So they're 30-odd-year-old. They call these leatherback seats, or ladderback seats. And it's been carpeted out fully with the black quality carpet. It's got a hood. My attraction to the MG cars is I used to work in Rovers in A building when it was pressed steel, and we built the body of the Midget, the Sprite, the Midget, and also the MGB in A building. And I've worked on these and done show bodies for the Earlscourt show, so I've really got a good connection with the car, and therefore I'm sort of bred into it from 30 years ago.
My name is Terry. This is my MGB Roadster. It's a limited edition car. It was one of the last 200 ever made. In fact, it was made in September, I think the 25th, 1980. It was sold to a collector who stored the car, had it wax sold, and he actually kept the car for 10 years without registering it. It was then put into an auction in the Sunday Times and had a reserve price in the auction of £20,000. It was actually sold for £20,050 in 1990 and was then first registered. I found the car by chance and a stroke of luck, I think. The car, when I got it, had 5,000 miles on the clock. We had the car checked over with the Heritage Centre and everything proved to be valid. We've had the car 1 year only. The car now has another 3,500 miles on the clock as we've started to use it and have now completed the running in of the car. We've just returned from a holiday in France. We're very happy with the car. As you can see, it's in very good condition, and it is all original, but has extras such as the wire wheels, which were added by the guy when he put it into auction.
bought this car in 1976. At that time, there were quite a few of these about, but they were all in tea chests and boxes. For whatever reason, they all seemed to be in pieces. This was the first one I ever saw in actually that you could get in and drive down the road. What I didn't realise at the time was that most of it wasn't MG. It had been cobbled up from various bits and pieces out of a breaker's yard. So I probably spent about the next 10 years collecting an engine, a gearbox, steering, radiator, wings, and got it all together. Finished it about early 91. As you see it now, it's deteriorated a bit in the last 10 years, but there we go. I did discover that it had a massive accident which virtually bent the car in half, and then all the wrong bits had gone on because the front half of the car had obviously been written off. I figured by looking at the age of the parts and what would have been available in breaker's yard that the accident happened probably late 40s, early 50s, and the car is Irish registered, so it was in Northern Ireland before that. So it probably came over just after the end of the war when England needed cars and they didn't have any. Probably came over here, had a big accident, and because there weren't any cars around, it was rebuilt. But other than that, it would definitely have been a write-off. So it's because of Hitler that this car's still here, probably. The car is a 1935 MG PA. It has an 847cc four-cylinder engine, overhead camshaft, and a vertical dynamo which drives the overhead camshaft. It's more or less standard and is fairly original, apart from the racing filler cap on the radiator, which should have an octagonal one. Otherwise it's fairly original. My attraction to MGs is the fact that they have got a very good racing history and they're less expensive than things like Jaguars and Bentleys. Otherwise I'd probably be driving a vintage Bentley at some other meeting somewhere.
Underwood. This is my 1939 MG TA, which I acquired in 1967 when I was 18 years of age. By the time I acquired this car, they were still in use as everyday transport, and I used it as everyday transport when I got it on the road after purchasing it. I bought the car from an advertisement in the Leicester Mercury newspaper for £45, and it obviously wasn't in this condition. The wings were off and the upholstery was in quite poor condition. But I did being only 18 years of age and very anxious to drive it, I did the sort of virtually the absolute minimum to put it back together and get it MOT tested and get it on the road and to use it. After getting it on the road, I ran it as everyday transport myself for about 3 years until I had aspirations for something better and faster. And sadly then it, for some reason or other, I didn't sell it, and it got put and stored in a friend's pigsty for a number of years. After a number of years of it being stored and me having various other cars and gradually getting a little bit more prosperous, I hankered back to driving it again and got it out of the pigsty and into a proper garage this time, and did a more comprehensive rebuild and a proper respray on it. It's been fairly comprehensively modified over the years. The original TA engine wasn't in it when I had it, so I acquired a later MG GT engine and gearbox, the XPAG engine, which is tuned to stage 2 with the bigger valves and a higher compression ratio to take advantage of the better quality fuels. Also, you'll notice that it's on the 16-inch wheels and tyres, which was a fairly common modification in the late 60s, early 70s, when 19-inch tyres became quite scarce. And I've kept it on the 16-inch wheels and tyres because I like them. I think they look more meaty and more purposeful, and not quite so spindly as the 19-inch tyres. So as time passed into the early 70s, and as I say, I became a bit more prosperous, it became a second car, and went off on various runs with friends in it, to Wales, frequently at Easter for our holidays. And one weekend we went to St David's Head in Wales, and coming home, we came home via Solva Sands near Newgale and hit a Morris Minor head-on going down the hill towards Newgale Beach, which took out the corner of the axle and took the wing off and bent the chassis and made quite a mess of it, and it had to be recovered from there back to the Midlands where I lived. And after that then it got a really sort of serious rebuild then, right down to the chassis. And I should think in the time I've owned it, I've had every nut and bolt and screw undone at some time on it, you know, down to things like stripping the windscreen wiper right down to the last screw, and all the door hinges down to the last screw and spring, and cleaning them and greasing them and putting them all back together. So although it's not absolutely immaculate or what people would describe as a concourse car, it's very usable and well used, and I'd like to think reliable. In later years, my employment moved me to Swansea in South Wales, and I became involved with Swansea Historic Vehicle Register, who in 1991 organised a trip to Cork in Southern Ireland and Kinsale, and we went over from Swansea on the Swansea-Cork ferry. Must have been 15 or 20 cars. What amused us was we drove from home down to the ferry port, and then went across to Ireland on the ferry and got off and went into Cork, and between home and the hotel in Cork we'd done a bit between 5 and 7 miles. Yeah, its current use is limited to getting it out in the summer and driving it purely for pleasure, evening drives and to various local car shows and that sort of thing. I did sort of think I might possibly sell it because I wasn't using it very much, and I tentatively put the word around a few friends interested in old cars, and someone approached me and said they'd heard that it was for sale, and it frightened me to death. I just could not, when it actually came to it, I couldn't contemplate selling it. So I know now that I never will ever sell it. I'll have it for the rest of my life.
It's 1935 PA MG, which I bought in 1948,
At that time it had got a standard PA body on it, but I'd always wanted something special, and I started to build a special body. Never got finished until about 6 years ago, when I retired from work, and I worked out the shape, designed the shape if you like, and took it to a bodybuilder who manufactured this shell. It's a lightweight shell in aluminium, and about 6 years ago it was completed, and I put it on the road. Wherever possible, I've always made bits of it myself, but where I hadn't got the facilities, then unfortunately I had to buy bits. But in essence, I've made everything that I could possibly make, and we take it to a number of meetings. We've been to France, we've been to Holland in previous years, and in June this year there's an MG event in Italy, and we're going to take it to Italy. And on the way back there's another event at a place called Lens in France, and as we're already on the continent, we thought we'll do that one as well. A lot of racing cars, weight is, consideration of weight is paramount, and a lot of racing cars, and you'll find there are K3s of this car. That's a 6-cylinder version. The pointed tail is actually the petrol tank. So if you can save weight, this is what you do. So you put a streamlined petrol tank on the back. In essence, that's what you do. But it was very much in favour, pre-war. The engine, it's a 4-cylinder overhead camshaft engine of 947cc, which is approximately 100cc larger than the standard PA engine. We have fitted oversized carburetors, and also a competition camshaft. Ignition is by a scintilla magneto, but in essence it's a very standard PA engine. It produces about 36 to 40 brake horsepower at 5,000 RPM. And she cruises quite happily at 65 miles an hour. I have had it up to somewhere in the region of 70, a bit over 70 miles an hour. But I'm always conscious that this engine is 60 years old, and one has to treat it with some respect.
I'm Mark Hubbard, and this is my 1973 MGB GT. Now, the MGB was followed on from the MGA, and was the first car that was produced using a monocoque chassis, as opposed to the MGA being a body that was placed upon a chassis. Fitted with the 1800cc B-Series engine, which became a very popular engine in a number of the British Leyland cars. Now, this one was originally manufactured in '73 in June. It was dispatched to a garage in Wales where it was first registered with this original number plate, and from there it then spent most of its life based in West Sussex. I purchased the car from a gentleman in Hampshire about 3 years ago, and since then I've specialised in actually tidying the interior of the car, as the interior was still original but unfortunately had got a little bit on the sad side. Originally the car was actually a harvest gold colour, and when I first set the task of finding myself an MGB, I always said I'd never have a harvest gold because I disliked the colour. But unfortunately, when I applied for a British Motor Heritage certificate, I found that the original colour, to my shock and horror, was harvest gold. And this I have substantiated by finding a few traces of the paint from underneath. The GT is slightly heavier than the Roadster, which is the most popular one and was the original design. But despite the GT being heavier in weight, the fastback roof style enables the car to actually travel slightly faster than that of the Roadster. This particular car has actually been modified in a number of ways. The handling has been modified by the addition of Spax rear suspension, and the performance has been modified by high lift cam, 3-branch exhaust manifold, and the use of SU type air cleaners. Okay, this particular model is a GT which has the fastback roof arrangement. The fastback became popular in the late 60s. Particularly the MGB GT was referred to as the poor man's Aston Martin. Now you also notice that this car is fitted with the chrome bumpers, and the chrome bumpers were discontinued in 1974 when it was necessary for MG to fit the rubber bumpers and increase the ride height. This was for the US market, where regulations required that they had to have an impact bumper capable of withstanding a 5-mile-an-hour impact. The reason why I have this particular MG is because I had an uncle who had an MG, and I wanted my dad to have an MG, but he said it was too impractical. Now that I have children, I also find it's impractical from a point of view of taking my kids out with me. But do you think you have to agree that it's just a classic sports car shape? And if you're going to buy a sports car, you've got to have a British classic.
My other car is this nice MGB Roadster of 1968. The car itself, I've had it for 17 years now, and I've rebuilt every last nut and bolt on it, paint, all the mechanics I've done myself, all the interior, etc. My wife and I have driven it all over Europe, Holland, Germany, France, Scotland even. We find it ultra reliable. It's a quick old thing as well compared to the YT that I own also. It's a nice car to drive, very quick, it handles well. I'd recommend it to anybody that wants some sort of classic car. It's not a high price range, that wants to have a bit of fun, get out there with the roof down, have a good time. It's ideal for it. This car itself is 1968. It's the chrome bumpered model, which is the more preferred model. MGB started off in 1962 with chrome bumpers, with what you call pull-out door handles and a 3-bearing engine. And in 65 they progressed to like a push-button door handle and a 5-bearing engine with overdrive gearbox and a lot more niceties available to it. This car hasn't got a fold-down hood, it's got the optional pack-away hood, which means you take it off and put it in the boot and the car looks nice and clean, and you can get a little child or children on the back seat if you had to. This car is a 1.95 litre, so it's 1950cc. It's been bored out. The engine is quite a high specification engine. It was machined and rebuilt by Peter Burgess, who's well known in MG race engine circles. It's probably about 110 brake horsepower at the rear wheels, which is vastly improved on the original, which was something like 75 brake horsepower. I did this for my own reasons. I've put a better braking system on it from the V8 equivalent car. I've got adjustable shock absorbers on it, and it's, as you can see, I've got alloy wheels, which are mini lights with decent tyres on, and the car handles and it drives very well, it accelerates well, and in essence I could take it on the track, I think, and be quite competitive and have a really good time with it. This is the 1968 MGB Roadster engine. It's got a 1950 performance engine in it with several other pieces that I've added myself. I put an extra cooling fan in, which is a Kenlow variety, which is thermostat controlled here. I've got K&N filters, which gives slightly more power and better breathing for the carburetors. Over the other side we've got electronic ignition also, which is much improved on the original specification, which is points and contact breakers and condenser. It's a modification that I'd recommend to anybody who owns one of these cars. Between the two cars that I own, that's the 1950 MG YT 4-seater car and the 68 MGB Roadster, if I had to choose between them, I think I'd still choose this one, purely because it's a car that I've had for a long time. I know every nut and bolt on it. We spent a lot of time in it, had a lot of great times in it. The YT is still fairly new to us yet. I've only had it 4 weeks, but having 3 little boys, that's very ideal for us to go out weekends to shows, exhibitions, etc., and just to have a good time with a picnic on the back. But I still prefer this one at heart, I think. I'd never ever sell it.
So our all too brief time with MGs has to come to an end. But memories last a long time, and despite the fact that the MG name ceased to produce any further vehicles in the 1980s, there are enough examples from early days left to help us remember this unique series of classic MG cars.